I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange. Hey there, spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, the Paranormal Pop Culture Show. As always, I am your host, Aaron Sagers, and pretty excited to have these folks on as guests today because I like them as people, I like their book, I like cocktails, and I can get on board with true crime, too. I mean, not committing it, but as a topic. So... Let me introduce them because you probably if you know my work, then I think you definitely know their work because they are big time, because every month over 200,000 listeners download the Criminalia podcast to hear stories of history's wildest and most devious criminals. Some you may have heard of, many you may not have even known existed. And it's more than just a true crime podcast. There's a lot of those out there. More than that, it's also a cocktail class because they offer up cocktail recipes to go with each criminal, and it pairs very nicely with the history lesson. But now, the hosts of Criminalia, Holly Fry and Maria Tremarchi, I think I got it, expand their pursuits with the new book, Killer Cocktails. Dangerous drinks inspired by history's most nefarious criminals. And if you're looking at the video feed, I did not intentionally color coordinate with the cover of the book, but it does work out perfectly. So the book is available now, and my guests are here with me now, Maria and Holly. Hey guys, how are you?
Hey, so good. Thank you for having us.
I am so excited to have you on this little show of ours. And Holly, really, I did not intentionally color coordinate with the cover of the book, but I mainly wore the Haunted Mansion shirt for you.
Oh, the best, the
So
sweetest kid.
the
Yeah.
but well, before we get into the meat and the potatoes and the spirits and the liqueur of the book, uh as I said in the before we started recording, we made cocktails for this interview,
Yeah.
Yes,
and
we did.
I tend to imbibe rather quickly. So let me get a rundown of what the drinks are that you made for the interview, and a brief backstory of the inspiration of that drink. So, Holly, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so my drink is one that is not one that appeared on the podcast. It's unique to the book, called a Crystal Clear. And it is inspired by Captain Charles Johnson, who may or may not have been a pirate, but wrote a lot about pirates, maybe, and is one of the places where we really get the seeds of like modern pirate lore. But because his life story and his identity really are quite hazy, the drink that I wanted to do with it, I wanted to do something that was completely clear. But because a lot of the tropes that we get of pirate culture and identity come from his work, I also wanted to do something a little bit stereotypical, but with a twist. So the Crystal Clear actually tastes like a pina colada, but it's not heavy and sugary the same way. It is rum, clear coconut syrup, and then pineapple hard seltzer. And it just makes this very light, bright version of a pina colada that is kind of too sippable, in my opinion.
It is
because it's
a
easy
great
to
summer drink.
it's easy to suck a few back without
Yeah.
realizing how much you have imbibed. So
Yeah.
drink responsibly. Although I will say, you didn't mention it in the opener, but every cocktail in the book has a mocktail version. So if you are not a drinker, but you still like to make drinks that feel a little more exciting than just popping open a soda, and you like true crime from history, then we've got you covered as well.
Yes, that is true. Yes, I apologize for not mentioning that. I guess I go straight for the booze. The we can
Didn't even get to that part of the page.
yeah. And Maria, you're a few hours behind us on the East Coast,
I
but
am. So
it,
this is my lunch cocktail.
yeah, what do we got?
So this is called, let me hold this up. This is called Pure Rascality. And it is in the book, and it is also an episode that we did during our Imposters season. Um, The drink I like actually a little bit more. I think I like the mocktail even more than I like the cocktail, but this is the cocktail version today. The cocktail and mocktail differ with one ingredient. So this is ginger beer, which I love. So that was actually my criteria of picking one today. I have ginger beer. What do I want to make? Pink lemonade. And if you're making the cocktail, brandy. And this is from Fred Demara, who was a born storyteller, born con man, could talk his way into anything and everything, and he did. And I think part of my favorite story of one of his adventures was he became, I use that loosely, a surgeon lieutenant in the Canadian Navy. He had no military experience and he had no surgery experience. And yet there he was, and he performed surgeries successfully. No one died. And that right there, like there's so many stories about him as a kid, conning the confectioner in town to give chocolates to his class and all sorts of things. But these surgeries that he performed, I just think some sort of miracle happened right around Fred's day that day when he was amputating a leg and doing, dental work on some of the military members. That's just amazing. So this is Fred's cocktail.
Or it was just a matter of, at a time, with that medicine, it was just like, meh, yeah, I guess
Right.
it's probably gonna die anyhow. So,
That
whatever,
is
it's all good.
right.
Maybe, although he is not that far back. He's a 20th century dude.
Yeah,
So
he's contemporary to Frank Sinatra because there was a rumor that, and it was, I mean, a rumor, it was a rumor, not a truth, that he was Frank Sinatra's bodyguard at one point, which of course had to have been, you know, send his ego up into the stratosphere, but there he was.
Yeah,
It could have been. He was that kind of guy that people believed that maybe that was true.
like catch me if you can, except, when real life is on the line. The Well, I borrowed from the book The Cage, and this
Oh,
is a cocktail that has black tea, green chartreuse, which I have on hand, and I just don't really use it too often, which is a damn shame because it is a very nice spirit, and a little bit of a pricey one. There's just a big shortage going on, I think, of it right now. But
yes,
so I
there
was like,
is.
I'm like, let's get a little fancy, and some vanilla syrup of my own making, and some vodka,
yeah.
and a shameless plug I will add to that if I have access to it. Oh yeah, so the vodka I used because. I know with Criminalia, you really focus on women criminals and right primarily. So I have Harridan vodka, which is a lovely vodka out of New York State that is a company that is owned by women, and Harridan itself dedicated to those kind of stubborn women of old and contemporary times too. So and they
Perfect vodka for that
yes,
drink.
yes. Have you had the Harridan vodka, Holly? Have you tried it?
I got like a little one that one of
Okay.
my local liquor stores had as
Oh,
like
Need to
right.
a
Try.
testy.
We need to get you ladies some of the Harridan. Get it in your hands because I think you'll like it. But the story from your book, I dropped the book, so I don't know what the mocktail version is. I had to look it real quickly. The black tea, herbal teas, and vanilla syrup is the mocktail version, but really inspired by Ursula Kempt, an herbalist, an accused witch. I believe she was 16th century, perhaps. Was that correct? And
Oh,
a
I
I
didn't
woman.
know there was a quiz. I didn't
I
know
know, right?
that.
I I
Well,
think close.
she was definitely, yes, I think, yes, it was 16th century,
Yes.
and was accused of witchcraft, ultimately executed, and really quite a sham situation. When witchcraft, you could be accused of witchcraft by if someone stubs their toe
Yep.
because, right after you look at them funny. So,
Yep. Hey, did you grow a wart? Oh, you're a witch.
oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
You must be killed. It
So
was
I
that
I'm
guess.
kind of thing.
still I'm still reeling from the fact that you don't use chartreuse very often. Like,
No, I think probably it's because I know that it's hard to get, so
it
I
is.
can choose. So it's a
It
special
is.
day.
Right.
So I
It's
will
nice you pulled
say,
it out for this.
Right.
let's toast to killer cocktails.
Yes.
I think I have that same coupe.
Coop, yeah, it's a
Mm-hmm.
nice little tiki coop.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh man, cocktails really just make the interviews so much. It's already fun, but really it just adds to it.
Relaxed and groovy. Relaxed and
Um,
groovy.
It makes lunchtime so much better.
yes.
I, by the way, have a cat who has woken up, who we will likely see because I cannot lock her out of this room. This is Sweet Lime, and she will
Hello.
say
Oh,
hello.
there you are.
She's pretty drunk already,
I know
so
she really. I put out a heating pad for her, but she hears voices and she just has to come around. So.
For those watching the video, there Maria's cute hairless cat has just made its appearance, and the so as far as I guess going back to when you were, wee little kids, what was the moment where you're like, you know what? I kind of enjoy this whole murder and true crime business. This really is something that I want to learn more about. Maybe even not even all that young, but when did that interest first lock in for you, Maria? Why don't you begin?
Sure. Well, I've always been, even as a very little kid, a storyteller. Now, sometimes when I was little, they may not have been true stories. They might have been partly true and partly things that I thought might go well in them. But as I got into adulthood, I started writing news. I started writing real stories. And the thing that I really liked about that was the research and the what happened. And I think the what happened version of telling a story, a real non-fictional story, is how I then transitioned into, well, that part of that story about that murder doesn't really make much sense now, does it? Like, or, where is that gap here? And I think over the years, a short few number of years, I started to really become interested in not just news storytelling, but crime storytelling. And because some of those crimes can be hilarious and some of those crimes can be devastating, and you never know what you're going to get.
Hmm. Hey, how about you, Holly?
this is so easy for me. And it's the nerdiest thing on the planet. So when I was 10, my mom was reading In Cold Blood,
Oh,
and she had left it on a table, and I picked it up and started reading it.
at 10, you read In Cold
And
Blood.
she was like,
Praise God.
this might be a little too much for you. It's about murders and an execution, and it's
Right.
based on a true story. And I was like, what?
Right.
And then I wanted to read it 10 times more. And it was honestly so formative because I became a hardcore Truman Capote fan. And it also cemented in me that idea, like I had never considered before, that like you could tell a story about something that had actually happened in a way that was not like what to me at the time seemed like the very dry way that newscasts played
News
out,
report.
where I
Yeah.
was like, what, you can actually like craft a story around something that's really happened and make it factual but also really engaging.
Mhm.
And that was it. Like I was just like, I want all of these. After that, I like tore through all of the like real shipwrecks of the Great Lakes books
Oh,
that we
yeah.
had, like everything that involved something that really happened but was conveyed by an author that was not just giving like a checklist of facts. I was like, I want to see how all of this works.
Told as a story is way different than told in news template format.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, Truman Capote liked a good cocktail, liked to drink, and I think if I recall, he also enjoyed a screwdriver, classic screwdriver.
He did.
Oh,
The
is that his drink?
I think one of his drinks,
One of
but he
them.
One of
definitely enjoyed the
them.
screwdriver. But so Holly was, at what point did the interest in cocktails come into play for you?
um this is a multi-layered story. So one, listen, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but there was a person in our family who would give kids cordials when she was babysitting. So I was drinking at a very early age, but also um I initially thought my life's path might involve religious orders. And when I changed my mind, I kind of went real hard the other way. So I was probably about 14 when I started drinking and made very bad choices. But I quickly realized, like, oh, this could be more interesting than just, about getting wrecked, which is what most of us do when we're very young. And then it's kind of developed over time. And it's really been in like the last 10 years that I've gotten really into just kind of playing with cocktails on
Mhm.
my own and taking bartending classes and really trying to think more creatively about how cocktails come together.
I actually would like to add to what you just said because I watch every week. We're over 200 episodes now, so we've been doing a lot of cocktails, and I really appreciate how Holly approaches making the cocktails because she's so creative about it. And I can never I can never guess. I don't believe I've ever, maybe once in like 230 episodes, have I ever guessed what the inspiration for the cocktail from the story is actually going to be. It's always a surprise to me where it comes from.
I think you've guessed more than once.
Really, I feel like it's been maybe
I could
twice.
be wrong. I don't
Like,
remember.
okay, I'll give myself twice. Like,
Well,
it's always something that's really interesting that gets pulled out of the story. And I've been working on this narrative, for our episode, and to see what comes out of that to become the drink, and the drink telling the same story as the narrative is actually really a very creative and kind of cool thing to watch happen.
how are you as a mixologist, Maria?
I am ice in a glass with a little bit of bourbon is what my mixing is. I follow Holly's Lead on cocktails. I've never really I was introduced, my father was a cocktail drinker. And so when I was small and we would go out to restaurants, I would always be able to taste his cocktails or eat fruit from his cocktail. And so I always had an appreciation for various I tend to think a lot of his were whiskeys, which is where I tend to come from. I am generally now, after we've been doing this show for a few years, I'm way more into cocktails than I used to be. In fact, when we were recording the audiobook, and I realized as I was sitting in the bar with Holly that I was looking at the cocktail page. And like that is something that would have been very strange for me to do 10, 15 years ago. And I picked out like two or three that I had that night. And they were all great. And it has become it's a growth experience for me in the cocktail world, let's say.
I want to follow up on that. Were you recording the audiobook in a bar?
Oh no, sorry. I actually kind of, now that I have said that, I mean, actually, that would have been fun. No, my hotel bar.
Oh, because I really wanted to. Oh man, I just had this moment where I could just picture you each drinking the cocktails as you're recording the
As we're
stories
reading.
and then giving the recipes, especially if you
It's
did
just
it all
getting
in one shot.
slurrier and
Yeah.
slurrier as
Right?
the day goes
By the
on.
end of
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
day, like you get to the where, like you read I guess we read about half and half. We did it over 2 days.
Yeah.
By the end of that first day,
You
you
need
could
a
tell in your audiobook exactly what we've been doing.
you need a translator for the audiobook and like what Maria
Right.
is really saying here is
Even
Right.
without cocktails, I feel like that happened
yeah.
because it's
No,
just
they were long days.
exhausting to do an audiobook.
It was
The
also an experience where I learned that after I ate, I shouldn't eat a big lunch and then try to read for the audiobook. So I can't imagine having drinks and having tried to do that too. It's a lot going on there.
what was sort of your approach to the book as opposed to the podcast, things that you wanted to preserve versus the different directions that you wanted to go into with this. Yeah. So what was sort of the mission and how it compared to what you were already doing with the podcast?
I
Maria,
actually,
you want to start with that?
sure. I had it's no, I mean, we've talked about this before, so it's no surprise to anyone. I write the narratives for the episodes of the season, but I had a really difficult time actually cutting them down. Because in the book they are just they're like little postcards that tell you about what the episode is. About 50% of the book is that way. The other 50% is news stories. And news stories, like I have notes galore on every single season of episodes that we didn't do that I would have loved to have done, but we didn't have time or I didn't have enough research or whatever the excuse was. That when you're trying to do a much smaller story, maybe you don't need to have all of that information because you can't fit it in anyway. And so some of them were really hard because there were things I had to cut out that I really wanted to keep because I felt so strongly that it helped that character, it helped that person in the story be who they really were, whether it was in, ancient Rome or, in 1982. But the new stories were really great because it helps you, I think, it helped infuse new energy into what we were doing. These were old seasons that we were talking about, but yet there were all of these brand new stories to tell about them, and new cocktails and mocktails to go with them. What new inspiration could go into that. And it's such a different way of exploring someone's life when you are writing something that is only going to be about 2 pages in a book. I'm sorry. Sweetheart, she's drinking my drink.
I again,
My little alcoholic kitty cat here.
Just to narrate the video is we're getting some really nice close-up shots of your
Yeah,
cat.
I am.
Cat badonk.
Yeah,
A little
definitely
bald calico going on over
We
here.
have sweet lime porn playing out.
I
the
apologize. She also has been included in some of our episodes where she will be at the end of my hallway and you can just hear her just kind of like yelling along with whatever we're talking about, and she has opinions. But what I was going to say was it's just such a, all writers know it's just such a different way of exploring a story when you're doing a 30-minute podcast versus a 500-600 word small essay about who that person was. And I felt very strongly that I needed it to come through. I needed the person to come through even in that little postcard size.
Mhm.
So that was my hard switch from script to book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can empathize with that. When you have an hour to record a story or even half an hour,
Mhm.
it's so much more than when you're a writer and you have a word limit of 600, 800 words to
Right.
tell that whole tale. It's why we writers are the worst editors for ourselves. I mean, how about you for Holly? How about your approach to this compared and contrasted to the podcast?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because for one thing, one of the things that we did in the very early iterations of the manuscript, like Maria and I were passing back and forth the whole thing and both kind of
Yeah.
touching all of it and being like, because I almost said I grew up editing you. That's not accurate at all. But
I think that's kind of
Maria used to
like,
write for me when I was an editor at How Stuff Works. And like the way that we work on the podcast is she writes the narrative, she passes it over to me.
Mhm.
I make some edits and pass it back, and she can accept some of those changes or not, or explain things that I feel like need a little more momentum. Um, and so we have a very natural back and forth in that way, and we're very good at kind of like, I don't even know that I would even say we mimic each other's styles anymore. We just have a style that's
Yeah.
developed between the two of us. And so we were doing it that way initially, but we realized pretty quickly it was going to be really cumbersome.
Yeah.
And so we siloed, where she was only working on the narrative stuff with our editor and I was only working on the cocktails, which bit us on the butt a few times because even though I was reviewing things, I wouldn't always catch that, like, oh, these 2 lines got cut. And I actually referenced those in the lead up to the cocktail. And now I have to rewrite my intro because it doesn't make any damn sense anymore. So there were a few of those that were kind of funny. But
I always try to pull them out, but you miss them sometimes. You just, yeah.
100%. But in terms of making the drinks, I always try to do this with every season, but I really focused on it more with the cocktails, where normally if we're doing a season, especially if I bring in a spirit that is, a little more unusual or a little pricier, like if I include chartreuse in a season, I want to make it reappear so that people aren't like, I spent $70 on a bottle of stuff on episode 3 and I have never heard about it again. So
I used 1 ounce of it and that's
right. So it's a balancing act of not being repetitive, but also sometimes, recalling the interesting ingredients we may have had early in the season. And so it was kind of fun with the book to have all of that laid out in a way that we're doing it at one time and not week to week to week, where I could literally make a spreadsheet and be like, we used rum twice here, we used vodka 3 times, we have only done tequila once. Okay, well, mezcal came in, so we can count that almost as 2 tequilas. Like, just like figuring out kind of the math of it. I'm not sure I'm entirely successful with it, but I try really hard to keep that balance. And that really became kind of an interesting thing for me, where I would see where something would wedge in between two other things that I had specifically on the show created to be very contrary to one another. And now you have to, like, it's almost like writing music where you have to be aware of the half note in between of the other two notes that you made to complement one another, but not be the same. And so that got really interesting, where I was suddenly like, okay, well, now Ruby Port, like, but it was a really good creative exercise for me. And I did some stuff in the book that I would never do on the show. Like, there's one episode, there's one instance in the book of a story that we tell about an art heist where a lot of little things got stolen.
In Mexico,
and so,
right?
Mexico.
Yeah, it was a Christmas Day art heist where all of these tiny, tiny sculptures got stolen. And so I was like, I don't know what the hell to do in a drink for this. And then I was like, what if we made tiny drinks? So it's like a shot flight. But when I was telling friends, like, oh, I'm doing a shot flight, and they were like, so it's just like 2 ounces of bourbon, 2 ounces of, and I'm like, no, they're all little bitty
tiny
mixed drinks.
Right. I thought that was just so great to go with that story. Like, you get to stretch what you do when you're moving into a different format, and that was just really fun.
So that's actually something I've really enjoyed about the book is as I'm reading the stories, I'm mentally kind of predicting what the cocktail is going to be. And for that one, I was thinking it was going to be because these thieves were really bad at their the ultimate job.
They
So
stole them and then didn't know what to do. Like,
I kind of anticipated it would be something that was going to be a lot of nice ingredients, but ultimately a throw everything, at it kind of cocktail.
Right.
Because they ultimately were garbage. So like I thought maybe it would be a combo kind of drink. But what's also fun about the book is I tried reading it backwards, looking at the cocktail, and then kind of, thinking backwards about the story before I read it. And
I feel like I'm the only person, maybe Holly too, in the world who has done that, who has looked at the cocktail and then read the story to see how they go together.
Yeah. I love it. It adds to the mystery. And actually, I was curious, Holly. I haven't concocted nearly as many cocktails as you, but I do try to come up with different things, typically from a pop culture inspiration. And so, let's say I'm thinking of Creature from the Black Lagoon. In that instance, I might think, swampy, Brazil. I'm going to go with some cachaça here. I'm going to play with this and that. And or sometimes I'll start with the name, like a good punny name or a bad punny name. So where's your entry point typically?
It really varies. I mean, it really varies a lot, right? Like some of it is based on that sort of like peak I'm trying to do at the progression of the season and trying to be like, okay, is there room somewhere here for, something with a cognac instead of like, the clear spirits? Is there room for something that's more like a flip? What have I not done a lot this season? But also there's usually just something in the text that makes my brain go, oh, that makes me think of coffee liqueur. Oh, that makes me think of Drambuie. Oh, that for whatever reason. I mean, it's very like associative. It's not it's the combination of that science of kind of looking at the spreadsheet and balancing it out and just intuitively being like, what does this feel like to me?
Right.
And sometimes it will be like, this feels like this style of drink. Okay, how do we make it fit this? That's not a very good answer. I think it's a little floopy doopy.
No, it's okay because it's kind of
during art heist season.
It was the best.
It was our favorite season, both of us. And I think it's the final season in the book.
Mhm.
The Jacob de Guyen had been it's been nicknamed the takeaway Rembrandt because of how many times it's been stolen. But as part of the narrative, we talked about how that portrait came to be, and it actually came to be because these two guys were best friends and they went to get their portraits done together, and if you hang them on the wall, they're looking at each other and they're wearing the same kind of clothing. And her cocktail ingredient included a marshmallow fluff blorp.
No,
To
no,
be,
no. That's
isn't that that?
that's
I thought that was
John
a
Dee's angel language is the one that has
is
marshmallow
that
blorp.
angel language. Okay, so I had that wrong. But there is a cocktail that she made this is based on the collar of the man in the portrait. And when I saw that, I went, I know exactly where that was the only one in that our heist season that I knew exactly where that
Yeah.
came from. It came from, like, it came from that man's collar. And her whole cocktail flight that season was just excellent. And I didn't realize she was matching her cocktails to the art that was being done. And at the end of it, when she told me that story, I was like, wow, I'm a dipshit, and I didn't recognize any of these. But they were all just, I think we were both so excited about the season. They were all really inspired. I think the cocktails in that season are great. I like the stories in
Yeah.
that season. And it's one of the seasons that I think of where does Holly take her inspiration? Well, sometimes from a quote that I might put into something, but sometimes from somebody's piece of clothing, which is also excellent.
Yeah, we have one. I don't think it made it into the book, right? The pink pajamas didn't make it in.
Didn't make it in.
Um, we have done clothes a few times, but the
Yeah.
art heist season was really fun because I often for each season make like some rules for myself about what has to happen with the cocktails. Like right now we're doing our season on dynamic duos, so to speak, crime duos,
I
which
remember
is a
that.
rough season because it's a lot of really violent stuff. But my rule is like it has to involve at least two spirits. It has to be a little bit more of a heavy hitter because we're always going to make it a double. But on the art heist season, I was like,
It was
what if I
fun,
make drinks that
right?
resemble the art?
It was a fun season to do. And I think when I'm looking at seasons and what we're going to do next and what we've done historically, um, I can already say that when we're about to wrap up Partners in Crime. And if we don't if we don't do a little bit of a lighter season next, I think our heads are going to explode. So because
Yeah, we're ready for
it's
a
so
fun one.
it's a lot of gunfire, it's a lot of prison escapes, it's a lot of, American frontier, it's a lot of just awful serial killer things happening. I try not to do too many of those seasons in a row because I think it's just real hard, not just for us, but for readers and listeners as well.
Yeah, well, that's on that note, there's when you're listening to the podcast, we are on this journey with you as hosts, and we get to know your personalities, your voices, and you can even interject in ways to kind of to lighten the mood at times when it's necessary. And the cocktails themselves, you're able to give us a stiff drink along with the story. But when you're writing the stories for this book presentation, Maria, what was the balance of talking about the material without going too dark, without going too much in a direction where people might even confuse this with glorifying bad people or even being
Right.
glib about the material?
And there's a lot of that talk happening right now. And I think one of the things that Holly and I find very important, there are a few rules about what we do, and they're more like guidelines. But but we don't talk about anybody who's alive. We don't want to insult families. We don't want people showing up at people's doors. We don't want that happening. If someone is still in prison, their story is not for us. So we don't spend a lot of time, back in like ancient Rome or ancient times, but we've been up. Right now we spend a lot of time in like Prohibition era. We've done maybe one person from the 80s. And a lot of it is because these we find most of these stories as horrifying as the people who are reading them. And we really want to share that we're not glamorizing any of this whatsoever. Instead of writing about, the true story of Bonnie and Clyde that everybody knows and everybody has this romanticized ideal about, we instead told the story of Blanche Sparrow, who was a wife of a brother who didn't necessarily want to be part of that gang at all, but she did it because her husband was. And it was just an interesting perspective to put onto a story that was a hail of gunfire, robbing banks kind of a story. Translating that to the book was actually it was something that I sat and thought about because you're right that when we're talking about the episodes, we can interject where we're like, now, wait, this is going to be gross. So, skip ahead 10 seconds if you want, or, whatever that might be. Or we can, say, oh, honey, I don't know why you're going there again. Like we can lead you through that
Yeah.
with us to make it better somehow. In the book, I actually found that I was interjecting some of those things in a written fashion instead. And I at first was like, not sure I wanted to do that. And I would strip it out and I would read it and I would put it back in because without it being there, it just felt so heavy. So many of those stories feel so heavy. Even if you're
Yeah.
telling the story of a witch from, 400 years ago, her story is still important and it is still big and scary and we told a story of a woman who had likely had dementia but was burned as a witch, but she didn't know what was going on and no one was helping her. And this was a story that appeared in the book, and I don't think it appeared on the season. And it was one of those stories where it was easier to balance if you could bring in quotes from people at the time. And of course, this is a very old story, so that's kind of difficult to come up with sometimes. But it's amazing how court records can hang around for centuries.
Yeah.
And so bringing some of the like putting facts into this story that you're weaving, and also just saying things like, girl could not get past that whole slap on the back thing she did, and just being upfront about it as we tell the story.
Have I ever told you, Maria?
No.
That's Janet Horn's story, and it
Yes,
really, really resonated with me,
I
and
know.
really was difficult to come up with a drink for it. And the drink I came up with is called Apology, and it's
Mhm.
about like just trying to recognize that she got caught in fervor, and she really had nothing to do with it.
Like most of them.
But like, so for the illustrations in the book, those are
Yeah.
actually based on photographs that I took of the
Mhm.
drinks. And then I run them through Photoshop and I draw over them and I do the thing. But like
Do the
photographing that
thing.
drink, I was weeping because I just felt like so it was such a clear example of the ways that the world can mistreat someone they don't
Absolutely.
understand, and it really got me choked up. And that one was probably for me, in terms of creating stuff for the book, the hardest one because I wanted to be so careful about it
Right.
and not be too, you know, blithe about her story. That one and The Loophole, which is also another one that is in the book but was not on the show,
Right.
which is about an enslaved man who was saved by the fact that he was enslaved, and like there
Right.
was a legal loophole that made him not culpable because of that. um but that was another one where I was just incredibly conscious of the
Yes.
story we were telling and not wanting to be like doop a doop a doop, now
Right.
let's have a little cocktail, like now let's have some hooch.
Like sometimes there'll be times where we want to look to lighten the mood a little bit, and sometimes the story is so serious, you just want to keep it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, you just want to honor the
Yeah.
story.
I just want to show the picture of the apology. I'm blurring for some reason. But this from the book, the Janet Horn story. I I was going to ask about this, Holly, but you kind of already spoke to it, that it's not always about being cheeky or fun, or you're actually, it seems like you're exercising some demons in a way, or trying to put things into more of a historical context, I guess, even through the
Yeah.
cocktails. I mean, you do it through the stories, but even through the cocktails.
It's
Yeah,
difficult
I
with
mean,
the stories too, though, because sometimes you want to be historically accurate and you want to make sure that everything about it is delivered, but you also don't want to make people think that it was kind of flippant or it
Right.
wasn't as important because it was long ago.
yeah, I mean the thing is we early on in the podcast, like the podcast started because um we wanted to tell stories about women poisoners, which was our
Mhm.
first season. And
A
you
great season.
realize so quickly how many people that have been vilified over the years and their stories told in short form, how that sort of shorthanding will simplify things in a way that doesn't really convey the nature of their life
Absolutely.
or their possible crimes or the way they were perceived. And so in a lot of those cases, like in that first season,
Mhm.
we got so accustomed to being like, oh, this person that allegedly poisoned hundreds of people was actually trying to save women from abusive
Right.
marriages.
There were
Well,
many
that's a
of them.
little different. And
Yeah.
so, in doing so, in telling those stories and coming up with drinks, early on, we realized like, oh, we need to, in some cases, kind of honor and toast these women for who they actually were rather than what society has thought they were for the last 400 years.
Mhm.
The one that jumps out in my mind is actually Lucretia Borgia, which is in the book. It's a cocktail
Because,
called Thrice Wed, and
yeah, no
it's
one
because
knows her.
she is often referenced and invoked as this person who is synonymous with like hardcore poisoning and being really
Right.
ruthless. And she actually wasn't, but
Right.
she was married multiple times to kind of serve her family's needs. And so when I came to the cocktail part of that, I was like, I want to make a drink that is really about her being used in that way and is almost like a wedding drink, but celebrates her and her experience and not
Mhm.
any of the poisons she is falsely associated with. So
Yeah.
that's why it's like that one's a little more complicated than some of the others because you got to blend up a bunch of fruit, but it's
Yeah.
very delicious.
And but
But
to your point too, I think that there's a lot where we also very early on decided that one of the things that was important to us was to look at it with modern perspective, which
yeah,
is to just to bounce off of what Holly was saying, and not just the poisoners who may have been poisoning because they were trying to do something else rather than just kill a bunch of people. Um, I actually thought that we would find as we went through all of our seasons, more people who were perhaps not as guilty, but generally speaking, I have to say that almost everybody that we talk about was completely
There's a lot
guilty.
of really guilty people in the
There was a
world.
lot. There's a handful of people in there who really did take the short stick. But uh, a lot of people just committed a lot of bad things,
well,
and
who,
that's
who,
just the truth.
well, who is someone then, from your perspective, Maria? If Holly's mentioning Lucretia Borgia, like who's someone on your end that you would you would toast as far as like not that bad or not as bad as history has painted her to be?
There are a few, but one that always comes to mind comes is from our imposter season, and it's Barry Bremen. And Barry would get arrested constantly because he always was dressing up and pretending that he was like he was a Yankee, or he was like in the golf club, or he was a guy who sold he was like a
Novelty toys.
novelty toy salesman, so like pet rocks and mood rings and things like that. But what he loved to do was actually dress up in like various professional team sports uniforms and run out onto the field, or onto the court. And like his story was fun because everyone loved him. Like even the police, as they were taking him away, would ask him for his autograph. you know? And he shows up in our book and in the season as kind of a real bright spot for me, where he kept getting arrested and arrested for this thing that he was doing wrong because he's pretending to be someone he's not, or he's, out in this field where he shouldn't be. He played part of the PGA Tour one year, like he wasn't supposed to be there. Tommy Lasorda kicked him off the field so fast, but Barry really didn't do any harm to anyone. And maybe the best part of the story is that he dressed up as a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader and got in a couple cheers before the police came and took him away. Now, this is not a bad guy. This is a guy who just wants to have fun. And that happens sometimes in our seasons, and it's always really, really refreshing to have someone that you look at and you go, well, he's obviously going to be a story that we have to tell, because there's no murder, there's no violence, there's nothing here but a guy who just wants to have a good time. And people wanted to have a good time with him, even the police, even though they were doing their jobs.
And also a lot of the times, like players, like there's one where he gets on the court. Was it at the All-Star game, the basketball All-Star game?
NBA All-Star, yeah.
And they started passing him the ball because they just realized he was there for a lark, and they thought it was funny too. And they were like, all right, I don't know who this guy is, but
right. And he was athletic too. Like there were a few sports that he was good at. Golf. Like he was, so he fit right in. And, the pro players that he was in the little group with, like they all knew he wasn't supposed to be there, but they were like, who cares? Like, this guy's great. Like, and we never get to tell those stories very often. And those are always just great to tell.
Yeah. Cosplay is not a crime.
No. He's like the opposite there of Lucretia Borgia. Like he's exactly what you think he is, whereas she was not.
As far as, I mean, the title of the book, Killer Cocktails, it can be a bad process of coming up with a new drink. You can think it's going to be great. Even when you sip it, you might be drinking your own Kool-Aid to the point where you're like, yeah, I think this is pretty good. So has there been a cocktail experiment that went so bad that perhaps you felt like you nearly poisoned yourself or your loved one? Holly, why don't you begin with that?
No, honestly, no. Because, once you truly taking bartending lessons was the smartest thing I ever did. Like for regular life, if I were not doing this show or this book, because it just teaches you basic rules about how to balance a cocktail. Mm-hmm. And so every once in a while, there is one where I'm like, oh, this is garbage. But I'm usually like, what is it missing? It's usually a matter of it's missing something that will fix it. And I don't want to always lean on, we just had it in a drink that we recorded yesterday, bartenders catch up. I don't want to always lean on tricks like throwing in Saint Germain or something like that.
I love the bartenders catch up. I don't know.
But the other thing is, I have my beloved to taste test, and because he's not a drinker, he's way more discerning than me. I'm like a lifetime drinker. I'll chug some trash for sure, but he'll be like, or he'll even be like, this is a good drink, I just don't like it. Like he can tell the difference between, because his palate is pretty specific. There's a lot of stuff he doesn't like, the things he does, and he can be like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this, it's just not for me. But if I can make him delighted, then I know surely everyone will love it.
Maria, has there been a moment where maybe a recipe that Holly has come up with, you said, I love you, my friend, my colleague, my partner, but I can't do it.
One of the things that I really like about how the episodes have turned, and this is from very early on, is I don't want to know what the cocktail is until we are recording the episode. And so my reactions to her ingredients list are true reactions.
They're honest. Yeah.
I don't know about lemon and we're putting that in what? I cannot point to a cocktail in our book that I have had or on an episode, that I haven't liked. Although I am not really a gin drinker, so anything that comes up with gin, I'm like, oh, I gotta drink a gin drink.
Are you dedicated to drinking it no matter what? Like at least
I try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Holly made it. She read the narrative. Of course, I'm gonna have to drink the cocktail,
I
and
mean, let's face it, you record remotely. You could be cheating it. That gin could just be some,
this,
club soda.
this is just cranberry juice.
Yeah. Iced tea goes a long way to masking
Right?
some brown stuff,
No one
There's
would
one thing about drinks
know.
that Holly and I have in common that we learned very early on is neither of us like the taste of water. And so anything that is not water, we, we are up for.
Yeah.
And I have tried and will try all the drinks that we do on our episodes, even if there are ingredients that I dislike. And there's not a lot of them. Like I'm coming around to gin. I am not a passion fruit person, but it has appeared and I will try it because maybe when it has friends, it tastes different, is what I think about it. So, and I just think that the way that she gets inspired from the stories to make the cocktails is just really cool. So of course, would try them.
and the
We
cocktails.
did do
Oh, go ahead.
we did do a savory cocktail early on that I quite enjoyed, but not everyone did. I'll just say
I
that.
loved that drink, and it's because I don't like sweet drinks. So when she did a savory cocktail that had mushroom in it, um, which did not make it to the book. I think that's just an episode.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might have been the cocktail that I was most excited to try out of every cocktail that we have ever had
That's
because I've
funny.
never had one like that before. It was so fresh and so new and so mushroom. I love mushrooms that
It's
I
mushroom and roasted garlic
I-
infused vodka to
Okay.
how
make a
can you go
martini.
if you're a savory tooth like me, you have to try it. You have to.
Yeah, it
It's
was a
part of the
weirdie.
beauty.
Just a weirdie.
It was. I do enjoy when the weird ones come around because those are the ones that I feel like it's going to be there's no gray. I'm either going to love it or I'm going
Yeah.
to not love it and but I got to know because it's a weirdie.
Are there enough recipes and stories? Obviously, the podcast you have a lot of episodes there, but are there any stories that do you have enough to do a volume 2 of Killer Cocktails already?
Yes, I
We're pretty
believe.
close. So the book is our first 8 seasons,
Yeah.
and we're on season 14 now.
Yeah, we
So
are just about to kick off season 15, so we are super close to like a similar sized
Yeah.
yes.
book if we wanted to
Yeah.
explore. Yeah.
And finally, before I let you both go, if you ever pursued a life of crime, maybe you have and you're just, keeping down low about it, but what would be the basis for your cocktails that you would include in a book or some other future author might include in their Killer Cocktails edition?
Hmm.
Who has Holly, are you thinking or you have one ready to go? Maria, do you have one ready to go?
There you go. It looks like Holly's thinking.
I mean I know what Maria's is. Mine is a
Oh,
little trickier.
tell me.
Yours has to have bourbon in it.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, I'd have on the side of whatever I do, would have to have like a whiskey bar. Like that, that would be
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Uh
I have grown over the last 4 years
you
into
have.
everything except for the occasional gin drink does not offend me anymore. That's huge.
Maria, do you enjoy bourbon cocktails as well, or
I never did previously, but because I try all of Holly's and she experiments with so many things, what I have learned is I actually like more cocktails than I thought I did. I tend to like the ones that have very few ingredients. Like this one has 3 ingredients in it. And because I'm lazy, I will make them, but I tend not to infuse my simple syrups or I just I will make my own, but unless it seems like it's something special, I generally will store by my syrups and things like that. But
Have mine, I'm ready.
I
okay,
know.
you ready to go?
I am. So my go-to drink, as you know, Erin, because we've had drinks together, is I either get an espresso martini or a vodka Collins. A
That's
vodka
right.
Collins is a great drink. It's an old school, your aunt playing canasta kind of drink. It's not cool, but I love it. I would make a vodka Collins with a shot of chartreuse in it.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the most Holly drink I can actually possibly think of.
I like it. I see it fitting. I mean, mine is just boring. Does it have whiskey? Is there a bourbon? Is there some sort of brown liquor in it?
Yours would be a whiskey sour, but instead of putting like a club soda to make it more like a John Collins, we would put just like an ounce of grapefruit soda on top.
I love a grapefruit soda.
I know.
You
That's why
didn't
that's
know
your
that
drink.
about it's funny what you learn about people over the last 4 years. Like Holly knows all my drinking habits.
So if either of you go on your crime spree and your calling card that you leave behind is, vodka Collins with a splash of chartreuse, we'll know the culprit.
If the grapefruit
That is
soda
the
in your
smoking
town
gun.
gets sold out, I've been there.
We didn't find fingerprints, but there are drips of chartreuse. Oh, Holly Fry did that.
Yeah.
Holly was there.
They're like, wow, this killer really is springing for the bottle of the chartreuse. So
Listen, I am white knuckling it through until it's more available again because Atlanta is dry of chartreuse right now. It's making me crazy.
hence, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll probably be driving through your area over the holiday season. So if you're around, I'll see if I
Stop
can
in.
get a bottle and bring it your way.
Stop
Are
in.
you
I'll
are
make you
you
nice.
devoid of yellow chartreuse as well? Is it all the chartreuses?
They're all gone. I have my listen,
That you're good.
scarcity is my greatest fear. So I have chartreuse left and I have quite a bit of yellow left. But I'm ever
Right.
ever on the lookout. I don't want to
Right.
run out because then I will feel desperate and crazy.
Yeah, you never want know
Like
when the
crime ready.
the cocktail apocalypse might hit. So,
Yeah. And then I'm gonna have to write a story about you.
And then
well, I really appreciate your time today talking about the new book and just talking about cocktails quite a bit. And the book, of course, is Killer Cocktails, Dangerous Drinks Inspired by History's Most Nefarious Criminals. And again, for video, I don't know why I'm getting fuzzy on the sides there. And my guests are Holly Fry and Maria Tremarchi. And I thank you so much for your time today.
oh my gosh, thank you for having
I know
us.
it was great. That was great. It was great being here. I'm glad that
Yeah,
she's
nice meeting you, Maria and Holly. Always good to see you. And
nice meeting you.
Likewise.
Next time I will make sure that the cat
We'll keep the cat butts to a minimum.
no, I
I can't.
mean,
She's got a little hole to come through the door, so I can't keep her out. Like,
yeah, it looked like it had a hole that was coming through the door, and it was right there on front center on stage and display for those watching the video. So,
she is who she is. Yeah, like,
like, hey, no judgment. No, I have no judgment. I assure you. Like, as just an aside, as someone that films a lot at home and has a dog that I love dearly, there are certainly times where I have to pause a recording or filming or whatever to be like, my dog's going to town on herself. I need to
yeah,
stop this because
right
it has a
back.
very
Like,
signature sound that will get picked up by audio. So, so.
I didn't realize all she needed was a blanket. She's been sitting next to me quietly the whole time now.
Well, thank you again. And I'm Aaron Sagers. This has been Talking Strange. Until next time, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.